The forest of Ardentis never truly slept. Even in the pale morning, when the twin suns hung low behind layers of silver mist, the trees whispered softly as their crystalline leaves brushed against one another. Ranger Owen had grown used to the sound. After 6 years of frontier patrols, the murmuring forest felt almost like conversation, though a very quiet one that never expected an answer. He stepped over a fallen branch, checking the small display mounted on his wrist. Atmospheric levels stable, wildlife movement minimal, temperature dropping slightly with altitude. Everything normal. Too normal, in fact. Another thrilling day, he muttered. The small reconnaissance drone hovering at his shoulder emitted a soft mechanical tone, as if offended by his lack of enthusiasm. Its spherical body rotated, scanning the tree line with patient precision. "Yes, I know," Owen said, glancing at it. "You enjoy this. You don't have to walk 8 kilometers in uneven terrain." The drone responded with a brief beep, which Owen had begun to interpret, perhaps unfairly, as sarcasm. The patrol route curved along a narrow ridge, overlooking a valley filled with pale blue fog. Somewhere far below, a flock of gliding creatures drifted through the air, their wide, translucent wings catching the light like sheets of glass. Owen paused for a moment to watch them. No matter how many times he saw the wildlife of Ardentis, it still felt faintly unreal, as if he were walking through a dream that someone else had designed. Then he heard it. At first the sound was so faint that he thought it was the wind passing through hollow bark, a thin, wavering note, almost rhythmic. He stopped walking, holding his breath. The sound came again, slightly clearer this time. A cry. Owen frowned. No animal he knew made a sound quite like that. It was too uneven, too fragile. He adjusted the sensitivity of his helmet's audio filter, isolating the direction of the noise. "There you are," he murmured. He moved carefully down the slope, pushing aside low branches that shimmered faintly where his gloves touched them. The sound grew louder, unmistakable now. A child crying. "That's not possible," he said. Believe it or not, more to himself than to the drone, there were no settlements within 100 kilometers of this sector. No research stations, no transport routes, nothing. The crying continued, thin and exhausted, carried by the wind. Owen quickened his pace. He found the child in a shallow hollow between the roots of a massive tree whose trunk rose like a column into the mist. The infant lay wrapped in a thermal blanket, the fabric glowing faintly as its internal heaters struggled against the chill. 2 wide eyes stared up at him, red from crying but still strangely calm, as if the baby had already decided that crying was pointless but was continuing out of principle. For several seconds, Owen simply stood there, staring. "Well," he said at last, "this is new." The drone drifted closer, projecting a soft scanning beam. Lines of data flickered across Owen's visor, confirming what his eyes already told him. Human, female, approximately 6 months old, mild dehydration, elevated stress levels. "Yes, thank you," Owen said quietly. "I noticed she's a baby." The infant made a small, indignant noise, as if objecting to being discussed in the third person. "Right," Owen said, kneeling carefully. "Hello there." He had no experience with children. None. The closest he had ever come was holding his neighbor's cat while it attempted to bite him. He hesitated, then lifted the child gently. She was lighter than he expected, but warm. The crying faded almost immediately, replaced by a soft, curious expression as she looked up at him. "Well," Owen said, shifting her awkwardly in his arms, "I suppose that means I'm carrying you now." The drone emitted a brief chirp. "No, I am not naming her," Owen said firmly. "We are taking her back to base, and someone qualified will figure out who she belongs to." The child blinked at him, then reached up and grabbed a lock of his hair with surprising strength. "Ow," Owen said. "All right, perhaps we should also find someone qualified to negotiate with you." The walk back to the outpost took longer than usual. Owen moved cautiously, adjusting his pace to keep the infant steady. Several times he caught himself speaking aloud, narrating what he was doing as if the child were an adult companion. "We're going uphill now," he said at one point. "Very scenic. 5 stars would patrol again." The baby responded by falling asleep. "That was not a joke," Owen said mildly. By the time the outpost came into view, The mist had begun to thin, revealing the angular shapes of sensor towers and landing platforms rising above the tree line. Owen felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. He had started the day expecting nothing more exciting than recalibrating environmental monitors. Instead, he was carrying an unidentified infant out of a forest that should have been empty. As he approached the gate, the duty officer looked up, then froze. "Owen," she said slowly, "is that a baby?" "Yes," Owen replied. "I found her under a tree. I checked. She does not belong to the tree." The officer stared at him for a moment, then laughed helplessly, the tension breaking all at once. "Well," she said, reaching for her communicator, "this is going to be a very interesting report." Owen looked down at the sleeping child in his arms. For a moment, the forest behind him seemed impossibly quiet, as if it were holding its breath. He did not yet know who the child was, or how she had come to be there, or why the wilderness had surrendered her so easily. But somewhere far beyond the silver trees and the drifting mist, events were already beginning to move, quietly and visibly, drawn toward the small, sleeping figure in his arms. The medical wing of Frontier Outpost 12 had never been designed to handle infants. It had been designed to handle radiation burns, bone fractures, parasitic spores, and on one memorable occasion, a surveyor who had somehow managed to glue his own gloves to a geological sample. Babies, however, were entirely outside the usual range of emergencies. Owen sat in a chair that was clearly meant for someone waiting 5 minutes, not 3 hours, holding a bottle someone had placed in his hand without explanation. Through the glass wall, he could see the infant lying inside a diagnostic cradle, surrounded by softly glowing scanners. Thin beams of light moved slowly across her small form, gathering data with silent precision. Dr. Halvern leaned over a console, frowning at the readings. "She's stable," he said at last. "Dehydrated, slightly cold, but otherwise remarkably healthy." "That's good," Owen said. Halvern glanced at him. "It's also impossible." Owen shifted in his seat. "Yes, that part I noticed." The doctor tapped a sequence of commands, bringing up additional data streams. "There are no signs of prolonged exposure to the elements. Whoever left her there did so recently, and with adequate protective equipment. That thermal wrap alone is military grade." Owen looked back through the glass. The child had awakened and was staring at the moving lights with quiet fascination, as if she found the entire process mildly entertaining. "She doesn't look frightened," Owen said. Halvern followed his gaze. "No," he admitted softly. "She doesn't." A technician entered carrying a portable genetic analyzer, setting it on the counter with exaggerated care. "Command wants identification confirmed immediately," she said. "Priority clearance." Halvern nodded. "Let's proceed." Owen watched as they carefully obtained a small sample, the instruments working with delicate efficiency. The process took only minutes, but the waiting afterward felt much longer. At last, the analyzer emitted a soft tone. The technician leaned closer, reading the display. Her expression changed from concentration to confusion, then to disbelief. "That can't be right," she said. Halvern stepped beside her. "What is it?" She turned the screen toward him. Owen could not see the data, but he saw the doctor's face go still, as if all motion had suddenly drained from it. "Run it again," Halvern said quietly. "I already did," the technician replied. "3 times." Halvern looked at Owen, and for the first time since they had met, the doctor seemed genuinely unsettled. "Ranger," he said slowly, "do you follow current events?" "Not closely," Owen admitted. "Frontier Patrol doesn't leave much time for politics." Halvern exhaled. 3 months ago, Princess Mira of the Vashara was kidnapped. The search ended 6 weeks later. The official conclusion was that she had not survived. Owen blinked. "That's unfortunate," he said, unsure where this was going. Halvern turned the screen toward him. "This," the doctor said, "is Princess Mira." For a moment, Owen thought he had misheard. He looked through the glass at the child, who was now gripping one of the scanner probes with determined curiosity. "That," Owen said carefully, "is a baby." "Yes," Halvern agreed. "A baby whose genetic profile matches the royal lineage with absolute certainty." Owen stared at the screen, then at the child, then back at the screen again, as if expecting one of them to change. "Well," he said at last, "that's inconvenient." The technician let out a short, startled laugh, quickly covering her mouth. Within an hour, the outpost had transformed. Communications channels buzzed with encrypted transmissions. Security personnel appeared in corridors where they were rarely seen. A landing platform was cleared, its guidance lights activating in preparation for an incoming vessel. Owen remained in the waiting area, still holding the now empty bottle. No one had taken it from him, and he had begun to suspect that if he set it down, someone would immediately hand it back. The child had been moved to a quiet recovery room. When Owen stepped inside, she was awake again, lying in a small containment cradle, watching the ceiling lights with solemn concentration. He leaned against the wall, studying her. "So," he said softly, "you're a princess." She responded by sneezing. "I'll take that as confirmation," Owen said. The door opened behind him, and Halvern entered. "A diplomatic transport is on its way," the doctor said. "They'll arrive within the hour." Owen nodded slowly. "I suppose I should clean my boots." Halvern looked down at the mud still clinging to Owen's patrol gear and allowed himself a faint smile. "It may be a little late for that." Owen glanced back at the child. "Doctor," he said after a moment, "does any of this make sense to you?" Halvern was silent for a few seconds. "No," he said at last. "A kidnapping of this scale, a search involving half the sector, and yet she appears alone in the wilderness with no trace of transport or escort. It doesn't fit." Owen folded his arms. The unease he had felt in the forest returned, stronger now. "She didn't get there by accident," he said quietly. "No," Halvern agreed. "She didn't." Outside, a distant rumble began to build, the sound of atmospheric engines descending through the cloud layers. The windows vibrated faintly as the approaching vessel cut through the air, its engines burning in controlled silence. Owen looked down at the child once more. She had closed her eyes, drifting into sleep again, utterly unaware of the storm of attention gathering around her. "Princess Mira," he said softly, "you're causing quite a lot of trouble." The infant sighed in her sleep, as if in mild agreement. Beyond the walls of the outpost, the transport ship settled onto the landing platform with a low, resonant hum. And with its arrival, the quiet mystery that had begun beneath the silver trees stepped fully into the light. The diplomatic transport descended with a steady, controlled roar that vibrated through the entire outpost. Owen stood near the viewing window, watching the vessel settle onto the landing platform. It was far larger than any ship that normally visited the frontier, its hull smooth and pale, etched with flowing lines that shimmered faintly, as if the metal itself were alive. "Well," Owen muttered, "they certainly don't travel light." Beside him, Dr. Halvern folded his arms. "Royal envoys rarely do." A few minutes later, the outer corridors filled with quiet movement. Guards in polished armor stepped through the airlock first, their helmets transparent, but their expressions unreadable. Behind them came two officials in formal robes, and finally, walking between them, a woman whose presence seemed to quiet the entire hallway without a word being spoken. Queen Vashara was taller than Owen expected. Her long ears curved gracefully back along her dark hair, and her face carried a composure that might have seemed cold if not for the exhaustion visible in her eyes. She moved quickly, ignoring the formal greetings offered by the outpost commander. "Where is she?" the queen asked. Halvern inclined his head. "This way, your majesty." Owen followed at a respectful distance, unsure whether he was supposed to be present, but equally unsure whether anyone would notice if he left. They entered the recovery room. The child lay in her cradle, awake and quietly watching the ceiling lights again, as if she had decided that observation was the best way to understand this confusing universe. For a moment, the queen did not move. Then she crossed the room in 3 quick steps and lifted the child into her arms. The composure shattered. Owen had never seen grief transform so suddenly into relief. The queen pressed her face against the child's hair, her shoulders trembling as silent tears fell. No one spoke. Even the faint hum of the medical equipment seemed to fade into the background. After a long moment, the queen whispered something softly in her own language, a melody of syllables Owen could not understand, but somehow felt was meant only for the child. Princess Mira responded by grabbing a strand of her mother's hair and pulling with determined enthusiasm. The Queen let out a soft, breathless laugh, half sob, half joy. Yes, she murmured, you are certainly alive. Owen shifted his weight, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a moment far too personal to witness. He began to edge toward the door, but the Queen looked up. You are Ranger Owen, she said. It was not a question. Yes, Your Majesty. She studied him for a few seconds, her expression searching, as if trying to understand what kind of man stood before her. You found her, she said quietly. Yes. In the wilderness. Yes. There was a pause. That is not a place where a child survives, she said. I thought the same, Owen replied. The Queen nodded slowly, then turned fully toward him, still holding Mira. I mourned my daughter, she said. I held rites for her passing. I stood before my people and told them she was gone. Her voice wavered slightly, then steadied. You have returned her to me. Owen shifted awkwardly. I just happened to be in the right place. No, Vashara said. You chose to act. Many would not have noticed. Some would not have cared. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. In my people's tradition, she said, a life returned creates a debt that cannot be measured. Anything you ask of me, anything within my power, is yours. Owen blinked. Well, he said carefully, I appreciate that, but I don't really need anything. The Queen tilted her head slightly, as if she had never heard such a response before. Nothing? Owen considered. I suppose a new pair of boots would be nice. These have been through a lot. One of the royal guards made a small choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. The Queen stared at Owen for a moment, then unexpectedly she laughed. It was a quiet sound, but genuine. You are either very brave, she said, or very unusual. I've been called both, Owen admitted. The tension in the room eased slightly. Even Halvern allowed himself a faint smile. But the Queen's expression soon grew thoughtful again. Tell me, she said, exactly where you found her. Owen described the hollow beneath the great tree, the silence of the forest, the absence of any tracks or debris. As he spoke, he saw the Queen's brow furrow. That does not match the reports, she said softly. What reports? Owen asked. The reports of her kidnapping, Vashara replied. There was a transport. There were witnesses. There was pursuit. Owen folded his arms. Then something is wrong. Yes, the Queen said quietly. Something is very wrong. Mira yawned loudly, interrupting the conversation with impeccable timing. Owen looked at her and smiled faintly. At least one of us isn't worried about conspiracies. The Queen glanced down at her daughter, her expression softening again. No, she said, she is not. Outside, the great transport ship waited on the landing platform, its engines cooling, its crew preparing for departure. Inside the outpost, plans were already forming, questions multiplying, and the first faint threads of a deeper mystery beginning to reveal themselves. And though Owen did not yet know it, the promise the Queen had made, the promise of anything, would soon bind their paths together in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The royal transport lifted from the frontier outpost just before dusk, its engines glowing in quiet blue arcs that bent the mist around the landing platform. Owen stood near one of the observation windows, watching the forest of Ardentis shrink beneath them. From above, the wilderness looked peaceful, almost harmless, as if it had never concealed anything more dangerous than drifting fog and silent trees. He knew better. A soft chime sounded behind him. He turned to find a service unit hovering at shoulder height, projecting a gentle light. Ranger Owen, it said in a calm, synthetic voice, you are requested in the forward chamber. Owen sighed. I was afraid of that. The chamber at the front of the ship was larger than any room Owen had ever stood in that could still be called part of a vehicle. The curved walls were transparent, revealing the stars beyond as the ship climbed into orbit. Queen Vashara stood near the center, speaking quietly with two advisors. Princess Mira slept in a small cradle beside her, suspended in a soft gravitational field that rocked gently with the motion of the ship. When Owen entered, the advisors withdrew a short distance, leaving him alone with the Queen. You are uncomfortable here, Vashara said without turning. Yes, Owen admitted, but that's mostly because I feel like I'm going to step on something expensive. The Queen glanced at him, and the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. You would not be the first guest to feel that way. Owen folded his arms, looking out at the stars. I keep thinking about the place where I found her, he said. It didn't make sense then. It makes even less sense now. Vashara nodded slowly. I agree. She moved to a console and touched a control. A holographic projection formed in the air between them, displaying the official report of the kidnapping. Images flickered, security footage, flight logs, fragments of intercepted transmissions. The transport carrying Mira was intercepted near the capital, the Queen said. There was a struggle. The kidnappers fled. Our forces pursued them across 3 sectors before losing the trail in a meteor storm. Owen studied the projection. And after that, we found debris, she said. Fragments of hull plating, damaged equipment. No survivors. Owen frowned. Then how did she end up alone in a forest, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest city, with no wreckage, no tracks, and a thermal wrap that looked brand new? That, the Queen said quietly, is the question. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The stars drifted slowly past the transparent walls, silent and distant. Owen rubbed the back of his neck. I'm going to say something that might sound strange. Vashara looked at him. You may speak freely. I don't think the kidnappers were trying to keep her, Owen said. I think someone wanted her found. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. If they wanted ransom, they wouldn't abandon her. If they wanted her dead, they wouldn't leave her alive and protected. Whoever left her there wanted her to survive long enough for someone to discover her. Vashara considered this, her expression growing thoughtful. And why would anyone do that? Owen gave a small, humorless smile. That's the part I haven't figured out yet. A faint noise came from the cradle. Mira stirred, blinking sleepily at the shifting lights of the hologram. She waved one small hand at the floating images, as if trying to catch them. Owen watched her for a moment. She doesn't seem very worried about any of this. She has faith, Vashara said softly. In what? In being cared for, the Queen replied. It is a rare kind of certainty. Owen nodded slowly. A sudden vibration ran through the deck as the ship transitioned into faster-than-light travel. The stars outside stretched into pale lines, then vanished into a luminous haze. Owen felt the familiar, disorienting sensation of space folding around them, though the ship's stabilizers dampened most of the effect. I never get used to that, he said. Few do, Vashara replied. Even after many journeys, it still feels as if the universe is briefly forgetting which way is forward. Owen chuckled softly. That's one way to describe it. They stood in silence for a while, watching the shifting light of hyperspace. At last, the Queen spoke again. You have not asked for your reward, she said. Owen sighed. I was hoping you'd forget about that. I do not forget debts, Vashara said gently. Owen hesitated, then turned to face her fully. If I asked for something, he said slowly, would you truly grant it? Yes. Then I want to know the truth about what happened to her, Owen said. Not the official version, the real one. I want to help find whoever was responsible, and I want to know why they did it. The Queen studied him in silence, as if weighing his words with great care. At first, she said, I believed your reluctance to accept a reward was modesty. Now I see it is something else. What's that? Integrity, she said simply. Owen looked away uncomfortable. I just don't like unanswered questions. Vashara stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. Very well, Ranger Owen. If this is what you desire, then it shall be your reward. You will assist me in uncovering the truth. Owen exhaled slowly. I was afraid you were going to say that. You sound disappointed. I was hoping for the boots, Owen said. For a moment, the Queen looked at him, then laughed softly, the sound echoing faintly in the vast chamber. I believe, she said, we can arrange both. Mira made a small, contented sound in her cradle, drifting back into sleep as the ship carried them through the silent currents of folded space. And somewhere ahead, beyond the shimmering veil of hyperspace, the capital world waited, along with answers that would not come easily. The capital world of Verthus appeared gradually as the transport emerged from faster-than-light travel. At first, Owen saw only a pale sphere floating in darkness, but as the ship drew closer, the surface resolved into vast oceans of deep violet and continents, traced with ribbons of luminous cities. Orbital rings shimmered like delicate halos, their structures reflecting sunlight in slow, graceful arcs. Owen stood at the viewing wall, staring in quiet disbelief. That, he said at last, is considerably larger than the outpost cafeteria. Queen Vashara, standing beside him, allowed herself a faint smile. Yes, we rarely hold court in cafeterias. The descent through the upper atmosphere was smooth, guided by silent thrusters and fields that bent the air, rather than burning through it. As they passed over the Capitol, Owen saw towers shaped like flowing glass, suspended walkways, and terraces covered in pale gardens. The architecture seemed grown rather than built, curved and organic, as if the city itself were alive. "I feel underdressed," Owen muttered, glancing down at his patrol uniform. "You are dressed as the man who returned my daughter," Vashara said. "That is sufficient." The landing platform was vast, crowded with attendants, officials, and guards whose armor gleamed like liquid metal. As the ramp lowered, a warm wind carried the scent of flowering trees from distant gardens. Owen followed the Queen down the ramp, trying not to stare at everything at once and failing completely. A line of dignitaries bowed as Vashara passed. Several glanced curiously at Owen, clearly unsure what to make of a frontier ranger walking beside their ruler. One elderly official leaned toward another and whispered something. Owen caught only the last words. "Boots still dusty." Owen looked down at his boots and sighed. "They have a point," he murmured. They entered the palace through a vast archway carved with intricate patterns that shifted subtly as light moved across them. Inside, the air was cool, and the floors reflected the ceiling like polished water. Servants moved silently, and distant music echoed faintly through the corridors. Mira was carried ahead by a caretaker, already surrounded by physicians and attendants. Owen watched until the small group disappeared around a corner. "She will be safe here," Vashara said. "I know," Owen replied. "Still feels strange not carrying her." The Queen studied him for a moment. "You grew attached quickly." Owen shrugged. "She has a strong grip. Hard not to respect that." They reached a chamber overlooking a wide garden where pale birds with long, ribbon-like wings drifted between the trees. A table stood near the window, covered in holographic displays. "This," Vashara said, activating the projections, "is where we begin." Images appeared, records of court schedules, security logs, transport manifests. Owen leaned closer, scanning the information. "At the time of the kidnapping," the Queen said, "several members of the court were absent from their usual posts. The explanations given were acceptable, but not convincing." Owen pointed to one entry. "This transport officer, why was he reassigned 2 hours before the incident?" "A temporary duty order," Vashara replied, "signed by a senior advisor." "And this advisor," Owen asked. "Claims to have been in a council meeting," she said, "but the meeting records are incomplete." Owen frowned. "Convenient." They worked in silence for a while, examining timelines and cross-referencing movements. The deeper they looked, the more inconsistencies appeared. Small gaps, minor contradictions, details that might have been dismissed individually but together formed a troubling pattern. "It's like someone kept rearranging pieces of a puzzle," Owen said, hoping no one would notice the picture changing. Vashara nodded slowly. "And yet you noticed." "I spend most of my life noticing things that don't belong," Owen replied. "It's part of the job." A faint noise interrupted them. One of the palace service drones had approached the table, carrying a tray of drinks. It hovered uncertainly for a moment, then extended a small manipulator. Owen took a glass and tasted it cautiously. "What is this?" "A fruit infusion," Vashara said. Owen considered the flavor. "It tastes like someone tried to invent coffee and got distracted halfway through." The Queen laughed softly. "I will see what can be done about that." As the evening deepened, the garden beyond the window glowed with soft, bioluminescent light. The palace grew quieter, but the investigation continued. Owen began to recognize names, patterns, alliances within the court. Threads of ambition and resentment that stretched back years. At last he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "There's a group here," he said slowly. "Not just one person. Several of them had access, and several of them benefited from the chaos after the kidnapping. Yes, Vashara said quietly. I see it now. There was no anger in her voice, only a heavy sadness. Betrayal rarely comes from strangers, she said. Owen looked at her. We'll find them. The Queen met his gaze, and for a moment the distance between ruler and ranger seemed to disappear. Yes, she said. We will. Outside, the pale birds continued to drift through the glowing garden, unaware that within the palace walls, a quiet hunt had begun. One that would reach into the highest chambers of power and uncover truths that had been carefully hidden in plain sight. The investigation began to move quietly, like a current beneath still water. For several days, Owen found himself walking corridors of the palace that few outsiders ever saw. Archive vaults, surveillance galleries, transit hubs used only by staff and security. Everywhere there were layers of records, fragments of data, and small irregularities that seemed meaningless until viewed together. One evening he stood in a dim operations chamber while a wall-sized display replayed security footage from the night of the kidnapping. Dozens of angles showed corridors, landing bays, and transport docks. Figures moved in accelerated time, blurred and silent. Slow it, Owen said. The technician adjusted the playback speed. A group of attendants passed through a service corridor. Moments later, 2 officers followed. Nothing unusual. Back 5 seconds, Owen said. The image reversed, then moved forward again. Owen leaned closer. There, he said. One of the officers paused for just a fraction of a second near a wall panel, his hand brushing the surface. The motion was subtle, almost absent-minded. What did he do? Owen asked. The technician zoomed in. The panel flickered briefly, too fast to notice at normal speed. He disabled a sensor, she said quietly. Owen exhaled slowly. And no one reported it. Because the log was altered, she replied. By the time the Queen arrived, several such anomalies had been uncovered. She listened in silence as Owen explained what they had found. They created a blind corridor, he said, pointing to a map of the palace interior, a path where surveillance was suppressed just long enough to move a child without being seen. Vashara studied the projection, her expression calm but her eyes hard. And the officers involved? Reassigned, Owen said. One transferred to orbital duty, another granted sudden leave. Convenient, the Queen said. They continued working late into the night, tracing financial records and encrypted communications. The deeper they looked, the clearer the pattern became. A small circle of officials who had quietly coordinated movements, altered schedules, and manipulated reports. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why leave her alive? Owen said, leaning back in his chair. If their goal was power, killing her would have been simpler. Not necessarily, Vashara replied. A missing heir creates uncertainty. Uncertainty weakens alliances. Owen considered this. So they needed her gone, but not dead. And when the search failed, the Queen said softly, they allowed her to be found. To end the mourning, Owen said, understanding dawning. To restore stability, but under conditions they controlled. A silence settled over the room. They miscalculated, Owen said at last. They didn't expect anyone to question the story. The Queen looked at him. They did not expect you? The following day, a plan was set in motion. Using falsified communications, the palace security network transmitted information suggesting that certain evidence had been recovered. Evidence pointing toward an external faction, rather than anyone within the court. The reaction came quickly. Encrypted messages began to move between several of the suspected conspirators. Owen watched the transmissions appear on the monitoring display, each one a small confirmation of their guilt. Patience, Vashara said quietly as the net tightened. At last, a meeting was arranged by the conspirators themselves, in a private chamber beneath the eastern wing. Palace security sealed the exit silently, while Owen and a small team moved into position. The doors opened. The conspirators were still arguing when the guards entered. One of them tried to run, turning too quickly and colliding with a table, which overturned with a loud crash. Owen couldn't help it. He winced slightly. That, he murmured to the officer beside him, is not how you make a dignified escape. The officer struggled to keep a straight face. The arrests were swift. Within minutes, the chamber was secured, and the prisoners were escorted away under heavy guard. Later, in the quiet of the Queen's private study, Owen stood by the window overlooking the city. The lights of Verthus stretched to the horizon, glowing like a field of distant stars. "It's over," he said. "It is ended," Vashara replied, standing beside him. "But not over. Betrayal leaves echoes." Owen nodded. "At least Mira is safe." "Yes," the Queen said softly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city below moved in silent currents of light, vehicles drifting along invisible lanes, towers shimmering in the night air. "You know," Owen said after a while, "this is the part where most people would ask for their reward." "And you are not most people," Vashara said. Owen smiled faintly. "I suppose not." He looked out at the horizon, thinking of the forest of Ardentis, of the quiet patrols and the whispering trees. "My life was very simple a few weeks ago," he said. "I miss that sometimes." "And yet," the Queen said, "you chose this path." Owen considered that, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "I did." Somewhere in the palace, a child's laughter echoed faintly down the corridor, light and untroubled. Owen turned toward the sound, and the Queen's expression softened as she heard it too. The danger had passed, the truth had been uncovered, and the future, uncertain and vast, waited quietly beyond the palace walls. The palace felt different after the arrests. The same corridors gleamed, the same distant music drifted through the halls. Yet the quiet tension that had once hung in the air was gone, replaced by something calmer, steadier, like a long-held breath finally released. Owen stood on a balcony overlooking the inner gardens. Morning light filtered through tall, translucent leaves, scattering pale colors across the marble floor. Below, Princess Mira was attempting to walk across the grass while two attendants followed at a careful distance, ready to intervene but trying not to interfere. She took 3 determined steps, wobbled, and sat down abruptly, looking more surprised than upset. Owen smiled to himself. "She improves quickly," said Queen Vashara, stepping beside him. "She's stubborn," Owen replied. "I respect that." The Queen watched her daughter for a moment, her expression peaceful in a way Owen had not seen before. "There are days," she said quietly, "when I still wake believing I lost her." "I suppose that never fully goes away," Owen said. "No," Vashara agreed, "but the fear grows quieter." They stood in silence for a while. A gentle wind moved through the gardens, carrying the faint scent of flowering vines. Far above, traffic drifted through the sky in silent arcs, the great city alive but unhurried. "The trials will conclude tomorrow," Vashara said at last. "The conspirators have confessed. Their network has been dismantled. The ministers who assisted them, knowingly or not, have been removed from their posts." Owen nodded. "Then it's finished." "Yes," she said, "because of you." Owen shifted uncomfortably. "Because of a lot of people." "But you began it," the Queen said. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned on the balcony rail, watching Mira attempt another set of steps, this time managing 5 before collapsing into delighted laughter. "I've been thinking," Owen said after a while, "about what happens next." "And what have you decided?" Vashara asked. "I'm not going back to patrol duty," he said. "Not the way things were." The Queen turned to him, studying his face. "I thought I belonged out there," Owen continued, "walking the same routes, checking the same sensors, arguing with the same drone about maintenance schedules." He smiled faintly. "And I did belong there once. But now, I can't pretend I don't see the bigger picture." "You have changed," Vashara said gently. "Yes," Owen admitted, "I have." He hesitated, then continued. "But I don't want a title, or a palace office, or anything that involves wearing ceremonial robes." "That is unfortunate," the Queen said, her voice perfectly serious. "I had already selected a very impressive robe for you." Owen glanced at her, trying to judge whether she was joking. After a moment, he realized she was, and laughed quietly. "I think I'll survive without it," he said. "What then do you want?" she asked. Owen looked out over the city, thinking carefully before answering. "I want to help," he said. "Not just here, on the frontier, in the colonies. There are places where small problems grow into disasters because no one is paying attention. I've seen it." The Queen nodded slowly. "An envoy," she said, "a liaison between the frontier and the crown." "Something like that," Owen replied, "but less formal." Vashara smiled. We will find a title that sounds less formal but still impresses people. I was hoping to avoid impressing people, Owen said. That, she replied, is precisely why you are suited to it. Below them, Mira had reached the edge of the grass and was now examining a small hovering maintenance drone with intense curiosity. The drone, apparently uncertain how to respond to being patted repeatedly, hovered in place as if hoping the situation would resolve itself. Owen watched for a moment. I think she's interrogating it. She will make an excellent ruler, Vashara said. They walked down into the garden together. When Mira saw Owen, her face lit up, and she held out both arms in unmistakable demand. Owen lifted her easily, and she immediately reached for the collar of his jacket, examining it with great seriousness. You see, Owen said, already judging my wardrobe. She has excellent taste, the Queen replied. For a moment, the three of them stood together in the quiet garden, the sunlight warm, the air filled with the distant sound of fountains. Owen realized then that the restlessness he had always carried, the sense of being slightly out of place, slightly apart, had faded. Not entirely, but enough that he noticed its absence. He had found something he had not been looking for, a purpose larger than routine, and a place where his choices mattered in ways he could never have imagined. Mira yawned and rested her head against his shoulder, already drifting toward sleep. Well, Owen said softly, I suppose that's the highest approval I'm going to get today. The Queen laughed quietly, and the sound carried across the garden, light and unburdened. Above them, the sky of Verthus stretched clear and bright, and beyond it lay the forests of Ardentus, the distant colonies and countless worlds still waiting to be explored. And somewhere in that vastness, Owen knew, there would always be mysteries. But now he would face them not as a solitary ranger walking silent paths, but as someone who understood how even the smallest discovery, a single cry in the wind, could change the fate of worlds.